This is my favorite snake in the entire world. This is a Burmese Python. And today I'm going to tell you from A to Z how to take care of one of the coolest snakes to ever live. My name's Adam, this is Lightning. You're watching Wicked's Wicked Reptiles, stick around. So first of all, I'm sorry, this is Thunder. Lightning is the bigger girl who's over here. This is my first Burmese Python. I got her when she was so small, she fit into a deli container. And now she's, I don't know, 7 foot long, and she's definitely hefty. I don't know how much she weighs, but it's a bunch. And the crazy part is, this isn't full grown. Like, look how big this snake is. This is big enough where I'm handling her by myself, but this is probably the biggest snake that I'd handle with nobody else home. And we'll get to that in a second. But the first thing you want to know when you get a Burmese Python is how big does this animal get? That's the same with any animal you'll ever get. And the answer is big. Real big. Now, of course, it depends. Everyone's an individual, right? Some guys like me grow up and we don't get near 6 feet tall, and there's the Shaquille O'Neals in the world that get to 7 feet tall. And that's the same thing with animals. Now, Burmese Pythons on average gonna get 16 foot for females and a little bit smaller for males. Now we're talking about non-dwarf, so mainland Burmese Pythons. Dwarf Burmese Pythons do exist, but they're really, really rare in comparison to something like a dwarf reticulated python. We can do a retic care guide if you want to. Let me know in the comment section. So Burmese Pythons, I've got a male who's 13 feet, and I've got a female who's 9 feet, but I've got a buddy who has a female who's 19 feet. So it really depends, and they grow fast, but they don't get to full size ever. These animals are gonna grow until the day they pass away, just much slower. Now in the first year, year and a half, 2 years, they're gonna grow pretty quick. But keep this in mind, when you get an enclosure, something like a 20 gallon or I don't know, a 40 gallon, you're gonna need to upgrade that in the first 6 months, guaranteed, if not earlier. And in terms of full weight, these animals can get up to 200 pounds. Now this is really, really rare, right? Normally you're gonna see an animal 75 pounds, something like that. My male is about 60 pounds. The female I have, which is shorter by 4 feet, is also 60 pounds. But I've got buddies who've got females that are 170 pounds. So it really depends. Just make sure that you're ready for something that's gonna get pretty darn big. Now, the next thing you need to know is how are you going to keep this thing? What size enclosure? What's gonna need to be in the enclosure? Well, I recommend at very least for a small snake, 8 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot. This is for a small individual like my 9 foot female. For a bigger animal, I recommend going bigger, obviously. So something that is 4 foot by, so 4 foot deep by 8 foot long by say 3 or 4 foot tall. That sort of thing is pretty standard for an adult Burmese Python. Now, I recommend if you get a even bigger animal, make something custom, get something bigger. But I mean, there's no such thing as too big of an enclosure. There really isn't, as long as you're giving them enough places to hide. And really, in my experience, Burmese Pythons aren't that reclusive. They're cool with being out in the open. All of my animals, all 3 of the ones that I keep, plus all the babies that I made last year, all of them like to be out in the open. They're not really hiding like you see with some animals that maybe are a little bit more shy. And in terms of substrate, starting from the bottom up, I recommend that you do something like a coconut chip and a coconut core mixture. This is just really easy to hold humidity, which we'll get to in a second. And then you give them a couple of hides. You give them a water bowl big enough for them to get in. You give them some climbing opportunities because although people say they don't climb, they definitely do. Trust me, all 3 of my adults, I mean, this is a sub-adult, but still, will use climbing space when you give it to them. Before we move on to heat, humidity, and lighting, I want to say thanks to today's sponsor, me. I've got another channel called Informal History. So I'm not trying to sell you anything. It is free dollars and free cents if you want to hit the link in the description. If you're into murder mysteries, true crime, travel, stuff like that. If you're wondering, hey, you went to Asia and you put out 2 videos. Where's all the other videos? They're on the other channel. I'm talking about a cemetery where they bury their dead without burying them. You can see the skeletons as they decompose. I go into true crime. Like last week we did the top 5 1980 serial killers that were never caught. If you're into videos like that, please consider subscribing or at least checking out my other channel, Informal History. There's a card right here for you to check out. And also there's a link in the description. Really do appreciate it. So if you're into weird looking bald guys on 2 different channels, please consider checking that one out too. Let's go ahead and get back to the video. And now we're gonna go to heat, humidity, and lighting because that goes in the enclosure too. And of course the enclosure, PVC I think is best because it holds the humidity really easily. It holds the heat really well as well. And it just looks really pretty, these black enclosures. enclosures, to me, look the best. So I recommend for heat, humidity, and lighting that you use something like a radiant heat panel, just really darn easy, and then maybe a heat mat on the bottom for a hot spot. And then in terms of lighting, you don't really need anything special. Basically grow lights, right? They're sun blaster lights is what I use, but you don't need UVB. You can give it to them. There's nothing wrong with doing that, but most snakes are gonna be okay without UVB, and these animals are considered nocturnal or crepuscular anyway, so you're gonna be a-okay not having that. Now, in terms of specifics for heat, humidity, and lighting, you're gonna want a hotspot, and your hotspot is gonna be in the mid 90s. So your hotspot is a surface temperature, not the air temperature. You're gonna use a heat gun, laser gun, whatever you call it, to measure this. This is the temperature of the hottest surface of the enclosure. This is where they're gonna go to digest food, warm up for the day, things like that. And then in terms of the warm end, the air temperature, you're gonna want something that's in the mid 80s up to, I don't know, like 88, 84 to 88, something like that. And keep in mind, this is a care guide. This is not a do as I say or your snake will implode. I'm not saying that at all. And then you have a cool end too. You're creating a gradient. And over 8 feet, you can create quite the gradient. So say your warm end is 87 degrees. Then your cool end, you want somewhere, I don't know, 78 to 82, something like that. You want around 80 degrees, somewhere in that spot. And then for a night drop, because these guys come from really close to the equator, places like Thailand, Vietnam, Southeast Asia, more or less, you're not gonna wanna give them too much of a night drop. I've been to these places at night, I'm telling you, it's just as sweaty and humid at night as it is during the day. But you can go into the mid-low 70s if you really want to. And in terms of humidity, these animals like it humid, okay? So we're talking about 60, 70%. If you get down to 50 for a while, no big deal. If it spikes at 80 at nighttime, that's okay too. You just want to be hovering around 60, 70%. And then if you see shedding issues or they're wheezing or they're stargazing, you're going to do more research than this video, of course. So if you're seeing issues where humidity might be a problem, then you fix it. But just mostly common sense more than anything else. Now, in terms of diet, I mean, most pythons are really, really easy, and these guys are no different. These snakes are gonna eat rodents in captivity. So when they're babies, you feed them small rats, and you're gonna wanna feed them once a week, twice a week, maybe when they're right out of the egg. And as they get a little bit older, you give them bigger rats, right? So you're gonna start with really tiny rats, and then you get bigger rats. And then as they get a little bit older, and you see that they're putting on weight really fast and growing fast, you can go down to every 2 weeks. And as they get a little bit bigger, you give them bigger prey items. More or less, the thickness of the snake, that's the size of their prey item that you're going to give them. And as they get older, their metabolism is going to slow down. So you're going to start going from, once a week as babies to once every 6 weeks as an adult like Kratos here. So keep in mind, this is a care guide, okay? So there's no, okay, well, it's been 6 months and 32 days since they hatched out of the egg and they weigh approximately this many grams. So according to my calculations, they need to eat, no. That's not how this works. Just use common sense. If you have questions, go to a forum, ask questions in this comment section. Don't stress out. Owning a snake should be fun. It's not a science experiment where you're gonna be graded at the end. Next, let's go to behavior as our fourth category. Behavior. Now, this is an animal that is rather large, okay? This is a 7-foot animal. I don't know how much she weighs, but it's more than 3 ball pythons, I'll tell you that, okay? And this is an animal that's kind of cool, calm, collected, placid. Now, always be careful with any snake. You always want to treat a snake like it has a sharp end, because it does. It has a big head, and if it wanted to bite me, it could. Anything with a mouth can bite you, but I feel pretty confident with this animal. They're placid. Almost as confident as with a ball python or a corn snake. I just feel like they're super placid. They're not that fast moving. You can read them pretty darn easily, and as long as they're not in food mode and they don't look like they want to be, away from you, you're gonna be a-okay for the most part. Now, with this said, these are big animals, and accidents happen, mistakes happen. Animals can be unpredictable just like humans can, so always be careful. And I always say that you have to have a hard and fast rule. In my house, anything over 8 feet doesn't get handled alone, period. I live by myself, but I have employees, right? So if I'm handling a snake that's 13 foot or 15 foot, I don't do it when I'm home alone. Just because if for some reason that snake decided I was food, That's all she wrote. And I'm not saying that you should be scared of your Burmese Python, you shouldn't. I feel very confident when I handle this animal. It's just an abundance of caution. Simple as that. Now, otherwise, in terms of behavior, they will climb, they will swim, but these animals are really easy to take care of. But I always compare them to golden retrievers. I have one of those too. Golden retrievers are my favorite dog. Burmese Pythons are my favorite snake. And these are the golden retrievers of snakes. They're smart, but they don't always seem it. They're a treat to handle, and that's part of the reason, a big reason why they're my favorite snake on earth. Now let's go to our last category, price, availability, and morph, because all this means nothing to you unless you can actually afford one, and you can. That's the good news, especially if you're in the US. Now the US and Canada, to get a normal, you can get them pretty easily. 250 bucks Canadian is what I sell my normals for. You can get them, an albino for 350 bucks, and then you get into things, like double recessives, where you have a hypo albino, which is called a pearl, things like that, where they're going to be a little bit more expensive, but you can afford them. And there's tons and tons and tons of morphs. Last year, I produced a clutch and I had 4 morphs. I mean, realistically, normal is not a morph, or classic. Hypos, albinos, and albino hypos. Okay, so I got 4 different outcomes out of 22 eggs, and I get a bunch of each. And in terms of availability, they're available. But keep in mind, this is not usually a category I go into with many animals, but legality. And in some states like Florida, it is illegal to keep Burmese Pythons. And in fact, since 2012, you can't bring Burmese Pythons into the country of the USA. So make sure that you know your laws and local bylaws and things like that, because just because you live in Quebec and there's not a full-out ban on the species in the entire province, doesn't mean that your local bylaw for your city, region, municipality, whatever, doesn't have a law against them. So always do your research and make sure you're not keeping something illegal, because what happens is, if someone finds out and a bylaw officer comes, they take your snake, and guess what? Usually they dispatch it. So obviously be careful, but if it's legal where you are to own one, they're amazing pets, they're available, and they're affordable. So I want to hear from you. What do you think? Would you ever get a Burmese Python? Let me know in the comment section below. And what's the next care guide of an animal that you want to see me do? As always, thanks for hitting like and subscribe. Really helps the channel. And as always too, thanks for the Patreon supporters for subscribing there. For as little as $1 a month, you get videos early, discounts on merch. You get one-on-ones. I love doing those with you guys. All that for as little as $1. And because I do videos twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays, that means I'll see you in the next one.